All right. Well, feel free to keep doing that. I think it's really fun for people to connect. I know it's hard when you're on Zoom and working so far apart, but this is our community. So it's really good to see names over and over. The what I want to do is I want to introduce Mike Wheeler, who is one of our founding pilot organization members and of the HASS project. And I guess I should introduce myself. I'm Dr. Ellen Jefferson, and I am one of the founders of the HASS project, and currently, for my real job, the CEO of Austin Pets Alive. And Mike, do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Mike Wheeler. I'm the Director of Community Services in the city of Cabot, Arkansas, a small city, but big hearts. So my community loves us. We love our community. So I'm just glad to be a part of this. And thank you.
Fantastic. So we're going to keep this short and sweet and not give you way too much data for you to process, but just try to help explain where we've been and where we are now and where we're going. But first, I want to do just a little bit on housekeeping. You probably have seen this slide before, but essentially we will be taking questions that we'll try to answer at the end. So use the Q&A function that's on the bottom of your screen, most screens, and you can use the chat, but make sure you switch it to everyone if you want to talk to the whole group. We request that the chats, of course, are on topic and kind, and we have a poll at the end that we'd love to hear if this was helpful at all or meaningful. And we will distribute a recording within 3 business days. So you'll have this at your disposal. So don't try to you can take pictures, but we'll give you a lot more information in your email in a few days. So I'm going to dig in, and I'm going to move through some of this quickly because I really want to focus on a conversation with Mike as one of the key contributors. And I know a lot of people that were here in 2020 and a lot of people that were not here in 2020. And so I'll give a little bit of some detail, but what we were looking at is really trying to change the paradigm of how animal shelters operate. And it came about because of COVID. And so when COVID happened, there was kind of a mass shutdown of shelters, and there was it was kind of a resurgence of ability to think about what we really want sheltering to look like instead of what it always was. And so I'm going to move to the next slide. That iceberg is just meant to show that I think the whole industry recognized that there were significant problems underneath the surface of the animal sheltering industry, still to this day. But it was maybe the first time that collectively we all came together and said that. So at the beginning, this was a pure collaboration. A lot of shelter staff and volunteers had more time because the shelters were essentially empty. And so the HASS project was able to coordinate amongst at least 165 organizations and thousands of people that were contributing to working groups and to the way that we're the thinking, envisioning what the future could look like, creating tons and tons of working group products like toolkits and tools that can be used for just about every facet that you can think of community-centered sheltering. The purpose of this, what we were actually trying to create is a model transformation from animal services. Everybody calls government animal services to some degree, and really trying to intentionally change that wording to human animal support services instead of just animal services. And we started with 22 pilot communities. And Mike, I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, on what it means to be a pilot and what that was all about.
Sure. It was a great honor, first of all, to be asked to be a pilot. But more importantly, what it did, it gave me and my organization in my city the opportunity to work hand in hand with organizations across the country, going through the good and the bad, learning from each other, because we can all learn from each other. And I think that's what we've missed over all these years is we've been siloed. Whether we're a government animal facility, whether we were a rescue, whether we were a humane society. But this gave us the ability for Cabot, Arkansas to work with, Dallas, Los Angeles, DC, places who had more resources, and see that we weren't alone. We all had the same issues, different scales, but same issues. And to come together with just us and then the thousands of people from all industries that came in the working groups to help solve problems that quite frankly, we've been sitting on, because we've been dealing with the status quo and not really looking outside the box. So for me and our organization, our city, this was a game changer for us. And I'm thankful to have that opportunity.
Yeah, and I would point back to the what portion of this, and just sort of, the beginning of it was really imagining some elements. I think it was 12 elements that we were looking at, that we were trying to figure out programming for, that would replace the intake, housing, outcome sort of elements that existed in animal services as is. And if I point to that last part of the slide, I think that, again, that collective understanding that the way it works, the status quo before 2020, and in some ways it's coming back, but before 2020 is not acceptable. We were in a place where our choices are meeting public demand is to, especially for government shelters, is to just take them in. And then you house as many as you can. You try to get some adopted and returned to owner, and other outcomes. But ultimately, most shelters were hitting a point where they had to make a decision if they were going to close intake to the public, or if they were going to cull the animals that they couldn't find homes for. And so that's a really difficult decision point that nobody should be in. And we should have a system that actually works for the animals and the people working in the shelter. And so I think that the why is really summed up in that way, is that we knew this needed to be changed. So moving on to the next slide. This is just to illustrate, in a very ugly infographic, but illustrate how animal services operate. So the pre-COVID, and to some degree still, because this kind of shift doesn't happen overnight. But the expectation of most government animal shelters is that they just take it all in. All these animal problems that exist in the community over 100 years, we've taught the community that take the animal to the shelter, take it to the shelter, take it to the shelter, take it to the shelter. And so the shelter is really the receptacle for all of the community's problems. But if we go to the next slide, you can see that the purpose of human animal support services is really to create interventions that help people and pets in their neighborhoods. We know that the shelters have a higher success rate when animals stay in their communities. That is not the same as just leaving them and not doing anything to help them. But we know that if that help can be more localized, especially when most cities and counties have one shelter that's trying to serve a very large geographic area, it's really important that there's more support out there. And so the idea of human animal support services is to take the people inside the shelter, working on the animals inside the shelter, and just move it back out into the community and still offer that help, but do it in different ways. We know we need to do it in different ways, but also so that there's not a separation of people and pets at the neighborhood level, if possible, or there's better paths to get them to adoption. And so this is kind of the ideal version. We want animals to no longer just be turned in hand over fist to the shelter with no support to actually prevent that. And we want to see a dynamic, an ecosystem that actually works and works for the people and the animals that are interacting with the shelter system.
Yeah,
So,
and if I could interject real quick on that, I just want to make sure everybody understands this is not forgetting about public and animal safety. Okay? We have never turned an animal away at our shelter, and we never will. But what we've done is we've embraced our community and taken the help that they've always wanted to give us. But because we were a shelter, as you said, hundreds of years, a shelter is a safe place. When in all actuality, we know it is the worst place in the world for any animal to be. I wouldn't want to live in my shelter, as clean and as nice as it is. So, but we've never forgotten about our responsibilities to public safety, and animal safety. Never at all. Truly aggressive animals still were immediately in the shelter. Sick and injured animals were still immediately cared for during this model. So it's just important to know that what is best for the animal was always what we did. So I think that's important. Sometimes that gets lost in translation of things, but community needs pets. 100% we know that. Not to talk about data, but my data has always said that if we keep somebody's animal, within 3 months they have another animal. So that shows that they need that companionship and they need it. And likewise, pets need people. So we just wanted to keep them together.
Yep. And I think the other epiphany during COVID was that people did it. And so we know it's possible. We know people care. We know that there's a huge community out there of people that are not living up to the stereotype of irresponsible pet owners or negligent. People actually really care, and they want to not see their pet go into a bad situation, or any pet go into a bad situation. And so we have an opportunity at our hands during COVID to get this off the ground and get started. Okay, let's go to the next slide, I think. And so the HASS project started with 5 original goals. I should mention that we were really blessed to have the support of Maddie's Fund coming in and making this a reality, that there could be some work put in behind the scenes to make that shift from animal services to human animal support services. But we knew it wasn't straightforward. It's not like you just tell somebody to go do it, because otherwise we would have been doing it all along, right? This is a much more difficult process. And so we worked with, I would say hundreds, maybe 100 people to try to come up with the original strategic plan that would hopefully get us from animal services to human animal support services. And it called for 5 big pieces, and that was the collaboration for change. We knew that any sort of change to our industry can't be by an organization. It can't be by advocates alone. It can't be by staff alone. It can't be by any entity alone is not capable of doing any kind of change, and change to this degree that we're talking about, because it touches everybody, and everybody needs to be a part of that, and voices heard and accounted for. And so with the collaboration, we were able to, and I'll talk about that in a second, sorry, I don't want to go into the progress made, but we knew that we needed to collaborate, that this needed to be from a ground up system. We knew we needed to build evidence to drive change, because sadly, one of the things that was really obvious right at the beginning is there was virtually no data or no evidence available to support any kind of change in any direction for animal services. And we know that the people that fund government shelters need something to go on. And so building that arsenal of evidence was a huge piece of this. We knew we needed to show some proof of concept. And so that pie chart that's in the background there that has the elements in it, we knew we needed to see those implemented and start gaining some momentum through data to show that actually does work. We knew we needed to overcome some of the legal system barriers. There are significant problems there that prevent this kind of change in our services. They have all been built over 100 years to actually support animal services the way it is, not the new way. And then obviously positioning DEI at the heart of animal services work, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the purpose of that is to really call out that we as an industry are really, really bad at that. We tend to all look alike. We tend to all think alike. And that is not representative of the people that actually need the services from animal services, and are really at the heart of why animal services exists. And so ultimately, our goal was to end up with the human animal support services. So we can move on to the next slide. And I pulled out just a couple of snippets because it would be way too much information, and I want to have plenty of time for discussion. But Collaboration, you can see that little map behind there. It actually is a much bigger map. We just struggled to find it to make an image of it quickly, but it expands the world. We have 350 shelters that are participating in the HASS project, from all over, literally every continent. And there are the sentiment of the public has changed from in 2019 when you search for community-centered services or helping people help pets, or HASS, Human Animal Support Services, there's one mention of those three terms. And when you get all the way to 2023, there's over 800 that are listed in different articles that are out in the world talking about animal services evolution and the need to help people and the need to really focus on the community for animal services. So I think that's astounding when we look at that progress ramp. When we look at evidence, we did several studies, really focused on several studies, and then also built out a lot more than that. But I want to call out a couple things, is that we did a extensive community value survey with a firm that is able to get people's input through all diverse populations that exist in that community, and it's targeted to that community's diversity. And also, it is not something that's not a link you put out there and then people just fill it out, and it gets, basically all the advocates fill it out. And so it was really meant to really understand what community members feel about animal services and the pets that they're living with. And 91% of people believe that, and this is amongst the 9 communities, 91% of people believe that government funding should go up, and they believe it should be taxpayer funded. And 92% of people participating in food banks have pet food needs too, which I don't think anybody knew on the human side or the animal side, even though it's kind of like obvious when you hear it out loud. And so we have evidence from our supply and demand study. We have evidence from our community, and we have built a budget toolkit to try to help organizations reach something that is going to match what the community expects of them. The elements, we have seen tremendous progress there. Of the 350 shelters that are actually using elements, dialing it down to just the pilot communities that we were working with, we see, and I know it doesn't look astounding, but it's actually pretty good progress that you can see for the pilot shelters that had a little bit more help for capacity building from our team, but and then also from each other, like Mike said. The non-pilot shelters progressed, but maybe not at the same rate. So that is, I think, really telling in terms of the pilot implementation and the need for just help as shelters are busy. And then for laws and structure, we went through, we started with the pilot organizations, and we went through 10 different community ordinances and laws, 10 different communities ordinances and laws, and scripted out all the things, all the ways that it impedes helping people help pets, or helping people keep their pets, or keeping pets and people together. And so we were able to pull those out and hand those to the directors. And now we have a toolkit that's associated with it. We also have the one that was created in the government communications working group. And so we've done a ton of work there. I can't say that we've changed laws, but I think we've increased awareness, heightened awareness dramatically. And individual communities are tackling different ones, like housing and different issues that really need to be addressed, but they didn't have the basis to go and say, this is where it's wrong. And then on the DEI front, I pulled out this schematic. You can't read it, but it is from our supply and demand study, and it shows that I want you to just look at the yellow. The yellow is in a community. They benchmarked 5 different social vulnerability levels within the social vulnerability index, and yellow is the most socially vulnerable person. And you can see the top part is just showing how animals are entering the system. And so you can see that there's a huge discrepancy between the people that are in need of the shelter to help them, and so end up having the shelter take the animal, And also the bottom part is just showing the support that was needed by the social vulnerability index. So the most socially vulnerable people are clearly the ones that need the most help from animal services, and why we need to make this change. So a ton of work went into a lot of those pieces, but I wanted to just pull one out because it's really hard to explain otherwise. So moving on to the next slide, this is kind of our epiphanies, and where leading us to where we are now from the last 4 years of work with a lot of you, with the pilot organizations, with the partner organizations, and all this arsenal of data and information. And hearkening back to that survey, the community is your strongest ally. It turns out that the community is not working against the shelter. The community wants everything that you want for the pets in your shelter, for the people in your shelter, and for your community at large. And you may have 1 or 2 different advocates that are out there heckling you, but the vast majority of community members are right beside you, wanting change and wanting positive change and wanting your government to fund it, which I think is just blows my mind. Let's go to the next one. We have a huge opportunity to professionalize roles. We see with the government funding work that we did and the studying we did, we have seen that the parts of the shelter that have the professionalized roles have the most funding. And it's because they're more able to advocate for what they need, and that's field services and veterinary services. And the rest of the shelter is very underfunded. And when we look at adoptions, the need for adoptions, for counseling at intake, for animal care, those need to be lifted up. And so we see a huge opportunity to professionalize departments and roles. Go on to the next one. We also found from supply and demand study and many other studies that have been done outside of the HASS project, and including the competitive pet placement project that our HASS team did in several of the pilot organizations, we know that many more people want pets than we think. We tend to think about the animals in shelters as nobody wants these are the leftovers, there's not enough homes. And we need to stop saying that, because that is also limiting the support that we're going to get, because it's not true, one. And 2, we are seeing that people who want pets from shelters are turning their back on shelters. And it may be because there's a self-fulfilling prophecy that's happening in the shelter system. But if you look across all the supply and demand studies that have been done, we see that every single state has way more adopters than they do shelter pets. It may not be all in the exact same area, but the states, including Texas, have all the adopters they need. The vast majority of stray dogs are not being looked for, but they are being cared for in the community. And I think that one is super staggering to me, because we have tons of dogs coming into city and county shelters, and very few are reclaimed. But what we're finding is that the majority that we believe, the assumption that we're able to make based on the data, is that people don't have the ability to look for their pet at the shelter. And the easiest way, of course, is a microchip and tags. But if that's not available, which we know is not available in most shelters for every single dog coming in, we need to think more about how we're going to reach the people that are caring for the dogs that are loose, and reaching them with the tools that'll work to help them keep their pets, instead of just assuming that they're dumped or abandoned or whatever else. We've also found that shelter impact is really hard at the community level. I think everybody knows this. It's, again, not necessarily groundbreaking information, but when we're looking at helping a whole community as opposed to just helping the pets in the shelter, the pets in the shelter is a very finite number. And when you look at the whole community, that could be millions of people, depending on the community that you're in. And so trying to figure out what is going to be the most effective way to help people, especially when we now know that when they get to the front door, the chances of them being resourced so that they don't need to surrender goes way down, and the return to owner rate goes way down. And so we recognize that there's a lot more work to do to make sure that if we have limited resources and we're trying to use it for community work, that it is going in a way that actually affects the outcome that we want, which is at the shelter level, at least for the HASS project. And then shelters need help capacity building. We see the support from we see the increased difference between the pilot shelters and the non-pilot shelters. And I think it's because they had data embeds within them, pulling up dashboards and giving it to them to be able to see on a daily basis, collecting data, creating new data systems, doing the things that that nobody has time for. And so I think this is a really good lesson for everybody here, is that our shelters need help. And then last, I think there might be one more. And then the solutions have to match the problems that are most perceived, not necessarily the ones we know that are good. Government leaders, I think most of the pilot organizations and many other members of HASS have also witness this, is that if it's not addressing the problem that they're getting the most complaints about, they're not necessarily interested in it, and they don't necessarily have the bandwidth to deal with it. And so when we're talking about HASS and we're talking about this evolution and this transformation, we know why it's so important, and we know all the complaints that we have and our staff has and our volunteers have, but the government leaders don't have the same things crossing their desk. And so we know that we need to connect the dots a little bit better. So and actually, Mike, let me back up 1 second. Would you like to add anything to those key learnings?
Well, I think the last one is probably one of the most important pieces here, in that we know our jobs. Sometimes we don't understand how government operates. The people vote, dogs don't. I say that a lot because the complaints they're getting from their citizens is what's most important to them. So we have to find a way to stop the complaints, but we have to be able to look at people and say, how can we help you? We're always wanting to help the animals, and that's great. That's where our heart is. But if we help the people, the animals are always taken care of. So we have to look at each complaint and see, why are they complaining? Is it because it's easier for us to not do our job? Is it easier for us just to take the animal in? Or should we offer assistance to the person who has the problem? Maybe we should fix their fence, help them fix their fence. Maybe we should help, set up a vet appointment and get some medical care for them. So the perception is what gets us. And it's good or bad perception. With a good perception, budgets increase. Your number of employees increase. Your amount of donations come in. With a poor perception, just the opposite happens. So we have to be aware of what's perceived, not just what is right. So I think that's probably one of the most key learnings through all of this.
Thank you. Okay, and so where do we go from here? We're rethinking everything. We obviously didn't achieve making, we being all of us, we're not there yet, right? There's still a lot of work. This is not something that just happens quickly, but it is evolving. And I do believe that we are seeing the progress that gives the hope that this can be a reality in the near future. But for now, we really need to narrow our focus and do that. We are looking at our managing executive committee, which Mike is on for the HASS project, and our pilot leaders have all agreed that this is the direction that we need to go for 2025. We need to really hone in on one message and make sure that it is hitting home in the ways that we need it to, the way shelters need it to the most. And so while the words might change slightly, we have really landed on the concept of homes over cages, or a homes first model, sort of looking at how the housing community for working with people that are unhoused has different models that are associated with the work. And so if you look back to the models that are part of animal services, I mentioned that one at the beginning, which is very startling, and I don't mean to offend anybody with it, but I think the cage, cull, or close model is kind of where we're stuck. And where we want to go is to this homes over cages model, or the homes first model, where the prioritization of every decision is based on the original home's ability and how we can help them to keep the pet, and the ability to move the pet if it does come into the shelter system or is even in the community and needs rehoming. That there is a very sharp focus on adoptive homes to prevent that caged part and to really open up both sides of the pipeline. And then also really connecting the dots, prioritizing the response of the Homes First, or HASS goals, to the shelter complaints and the problems. And so when we look at where the most complaints are coming from, or what the most complaints are about, it's about animals loose on the street and not being picked up. It's about bites in the community. It's about animals dying in the shelter. It's about animals languishing in the shelter. And so we feel like these two, if we focus on these two strategies for the next year, and our invitation to you, everybody who's listening, is that we want to do this together and try to figure out ways to make it more seamless between the pilots and anybody who might be wanting to follow along, so that there's greater engagement and conversation and crowdsourcing of the solutions that actually end up working. And so I can summarize these two, and then I think I just have one more slide, but focusing on, so really trying to connect where the human need is interacting the most with the shelter, and then also increasing adoption. So those two things. So if we go to the next slide, it gives a little bit more detail, but this would be piloting two initiatives. One is to find the human need that is touching the shelter the most on the need side. There's lots of people that are interacting with the shelter that are not on the need side. Those are the finders, they're the volunteers. The staff may or may not be in that bucket, but often they're the loudest voices. And what we really want to do is dig down and communicate with the people that are actually in need of the services, whether it's people who have not picked up their pet, but we know somebody's caring for them, or they are people that are reaching out for help through 311 or whatever call center you have. Really want to find out what is that human need, and how do we work with human organizations that are already targeting that and trying to tackle that problem. If we just add our resources there, then we have less work to do than recreating the wheel. And I think we'll see a better impact at the shelter level. And then the community pet placement standardization. This is really looking at trying to professionalize the adoption department first, and looking at how do we introduce key metrics? How do we start, like the competitive pet placement initiative that we looked at earlier this year, and you can find recordings on, is we found that most shelters don't look at conversion rate online, or the people that are walking through the front door. Most don't even know how many people are interacting as potential adopters on either end of that. And so how do we change that? How do we get in control of the people that are coming to us and basically telling us they would like to take a pet, and us making it so that they do take that pet? And so I'm happy to go into more detail on that, but I don't want to spend too much time there. And I'm wondering, Mike, if you want to elaborate on that or share any part of the discussion that's happened at the managing EC level.
Sure. The human services, that's in the title, human support services. So that's important. I mean, there's human food banks, and as you mentioned earlier, we learned that many folks didn't associate human food banks with pet food banks. We each had them separated. We've learned that by putting them together, we serve a lot more people and keep animals at home. But there's also, there's the DHSs, there's all the other social programs that quite frankly, the government runs much better than we can. So we should utilize those. But on the competitive pet placement, that's something that we've harped on, we've really focused on, and we're going to focus on more in the future, is the fact that now data shows that breeders are actually increasing their market share. which is scary to me and you. There are great breeders out there, but there are a lot of bad breeders. And we have a lot of pets that need homes already without breeding pets. So, so the fact that they're increasing market shares means that we're not doing something correct. We're not doing what the public is wanting. And our public, we have big groups, you know, you got Amazon and Walmart and all these other national organizations that now I can go on the computer, I can click a button and it's delivered within an hour. I didn't have to answer 1,000 questions. I didn't have to go through these long processes, but it's at my door. So we have to look at the quality of product we offer, which is amazing. Anybody that says that our animals are less worthy or less than a breeder has never come to our shelter and seen on our animals. So we need to focus on the quality of our product, the product that we have, and making that product available to everybody in the simplest possible manner. And I think that's where our competitive pet placement standardization will come in. And it's important that we look past all of our judgments and our biases of, you know, well, how do you know this person's going to be good, and how do you know this place is going to be good? Well, we know that people love animals, and we know, talk a little data here, we know that in a town of 30,000, which I am, that we write 54 citations a year. So we have 54 people a year that we have issues with that we can't resolve out of 30,000 people. So we're talking less than 0.1% of my population we're considering possibly bad pet owners. But yet we put that stigma and that judgment out there for the masses. So I think it's looking internally, and then, like I said, finding an easier way to service everyone who wants a pet.
That's great. And I think that's it. I did have a slide about the sourcing of pets, but I think it's too in the weeds. This came from Habry and PetSmart Charities, and we're happy to send a bunch of resources to you, but you can see the sharp decline from 2019 to 2021 in animals acquired from animal welfare organizations. And the total number of pets acquired over that time didn't change at all. So every year it's the same. I think there's a rhetoric out there that's saying that people aren't adopting anymore. It's kind of true, but people are acquiring pets. And there were more pieces of this study that showed that most people, even if they didn't get them from a shelter, wanted to. And so how do we, again, seize that bird in the hand and really focus on that to increase our live outcomes, decrease our length of stay, and free up our bandwidth of our people to be able to actually help do the work on the front end, which is helping people. So that's it. I'm going to stop and ask Mike a few questions, but we would love to hear questions in the chat if y'all are interested in throwing some our way. And I see we have a couple I can pull, but let me ask you one question, Mike. Do you, what do you think is needed for, beyond the 2 initiatives, what do you think is needed for this to keep growing and to keep heading in a different direction than what we've always done in the past?
Well, I think the main thing is we need organizations. We need organizations that step up and say, we're not happy with the way things have been. We want to make change. It is much easier for me if the organization next door increases their life saving and increases their community support and their community programming. It makes my job much easier. So imagine if 1,000 organizations this year decided today's the day we're going to make a change. Today's the day that we're going to care about every individual in our community and help them keep their pets, get their pets back, or find a new pet. Imagine how much better that would be for all other organizations. So I think moving forward, that's how we have to look at things. We have to look at things as, it's easy to get stuck in the weeds in our day-to-day. As a director, you know, we're pulled 1,000 different directions, as you know, as a kennel staff and shelter manager and sitting the front desk, we focus because we're just there. We're in the moment. But just think if we just said today, I want today to be better than it was yesterday. And at the end of the day, we reevaluate. I think that is where we keep going. And do I know what tomorrow brings? I don't. But I know that tomorrow it needs to be better than it was today. And if it's not, then we have to figure out why it wasn't and move forward. I think that's our biggest challenge, but also could be our greatest success.
Yeah, I love that. Do you, you've been involved from the very beginning with HASS and on the managing EC, extremely involved and activating every single program that you can, which I think it really speaks to how far your community is in terms of success. Do you, can you share how you keep this front and center without, I think that there's a perception that you have to choose life-saving over this over life-saving, or you know, having open intake versus this. You know, how do you keep it front and center and keep moving forward and making the dramatic changes that you've been able to make?
Well, first of all, I'm not an or person. I'm an and person. We don't do this or that. We do this and this. For example, in 2020, through HASS, I put over 20 programs together in one night with no funding. Okay. Because I didn't want to be the person to tell the person that needed help that I can't help you because I don't have a program for you. So, and with no budget. So let's just throw that out there. Okay. No budget's always a big concern. With no budget, because why? Because every time I ask the community to help another community member, they step up and help. So much so that and we don't talk a lot about my organization, but I'm a town of 30,000 people. And right now, in my donation account, I have almost $500,000 in my donation account. My budget has increased since 2019 from almost 500,000 to 1.7 million this year without asking the government for more money. It's because the public sees what we're doing and the government sees what we're doing, and we're helping them so much that helps. So I just look at things a little bit differently, I guess, than most. I don't want to turn anybody down for help because I feel like I am a public servant. So I should find every way possible to help someone. And this journey has been great because I've learned some things that I've never even thought about before, which has allowed me to work through that and do more for people as an organization. So I think you just have to have that attitude. My staff has bought into it. I know the staff buy-in's really, really big and really hard sometimes. But I have found, and that my community's great, my mayor, my city council, my government's great. But I have found if you're helping someone, nobody can ever say you did something wrong. So that's what we do. Every phone call we get, every animal that comes in, every inquiry on social media, we respond to it in a way that, how can we help you? Or how can we help the situation? Sometimes we can't, and that's sad. And if we can't, we try to figure out why we couldn't and make sure the next time it doesn't happen.
I think I'm going to move to one of the questions in the chat that's really good. With the pandemic as the impetus for the creation of HASS, what is the new impetus? Where can we find new momentum, and I'm assuming inspiration, at a time when things feel so hard, but there's no obvious global crisis to seize on?
I'm going to say this one might be a little more difficult for me. Pre-COVID, just for an example, we brought in 3,383 animals pre-COVID. Now we're just barely over 1,000 animals a year coming in. I think you find your inspiration in your community. You know, it's if we're not out in our community, then we're probably not doing our job. Some folks have seen my calendar. We are everywhere, anywhere we can talk to somebody. So much so that my officers are required to stop and talk to 3 random people every day, just to introduce themselves. So once your community is with you, everything is possible. We run government shelters. So much so that, my government shelter, it's by the railroad tracks and a swampland just across the railroad tracks from the sewer pond, the lowest piece of land possible. That's the way government shelters typically operate. So we have to get out and see people to make them come to us. And I think that's the important part, is making sure that everybody knows you're there to help them no matter what. So I'm not sure what the impetus is, because I'm not sure. I just don't know how not to get through it. I think it's just a matter of getting out and finding hope in people and enjoying people.
Yeah, and I think that, the impetus is that there's a couple things. I think one is, how can we not see the human need associated with animals anymore? Like it is not, I don't think it's an option anymore. We know it's there. We know we have this evidence. We know people are suffering, and losing their pets is adding to that suffering. And it is such an unnecessary piece of suffering that we have the power to solve for and to support. And I think the other one is inside the shelter. Staff are drowning in every shelter, including nonprofits, where the animals are not moving out as fast as they need to. The need just feels endless. And I think one thing that did come out of the pandemic is that, with the turnover and the kind of forgetting about how bad it was in 2019, we there's less of an acceptance, and I think that's good, even though it's very painful for leaders. But it's a good thing that people are not accepting of that. We need to galvanize that. We need to pull that forward and really demand that the industry changes, because the work environment can't change unless the industry changes. And we're nobody's going to do it for us, right? Like we've got to make it happen. So one of the things that is in here is what are some ways to identify the needs side of the resource depleted communities that animal shelters serve locally?
Well, I think you have to, once again, you have to be out in the community. I had before this pilot, I knew everything. I knew exactly what my community needed. I was wrong. I thought I knew what my community needed. And I spent a lot of time in the community, but you know what? I never actually asked them. I spent a lot of time telling them what I would do and what our organization would do for them. So much so as, I heard the housing crisis, and I heard that. So we put together a fund to help with pet deposits and things. And what we come out with is I had $10,000 in my pet deposit fund. Well, in 3 years, I paid out $750 in pet deposits. So that wasn't what my community really needed from us. We have it if they need it, but it wasn't. So I think getting out and talking to people, not at people, and that's an important distinction there. Talking to them, finding out what they needed. Now, are they going to come up and tell you that? But no, we have to learn to have conversations with folks. I'm from the South, so you stand in the grocery line, you know everybody's life story before you get to the counter. But that's basically what we need to do. We need to talk to them about their children, about their schools, about everything in the city. And through that conversation, we will learn what they truly need. So we get hyper focused when somebody comes in and says, I need to turn over this dog because of this. And then after we have conversations and we sit and we talk with them, we take 15 minutes instead of the 3 minutes it would take to fill out the owner surrender form. We take that time. Then we learn that they really love this dog. They really would like to keep this dog, but maybe they're having housing issues. Okay. Or maybe they just need, they're in an abusive relationship and they just need somebody to hold the dog for them for a month or 45 days, just so they can find a way out of this. That's how we truly get to help. And that's how we truly find out what our community needs. Community needs surveys are great, but but you have to get them to where they're needed. Putting them on social media only goes to the folks you already know. So, we did this through the HASS program, but my folks, I had volunteers and and staff going door to door with these surveys in some of our least affluent areas. And that's how we realized what we needed.
I think that's genius. And I think, and it's such low hanging fruit, like you said, and volunteers can help with that as well. And I would also tell people that if you're looking for the to do, you want something that's more tangible. We are the HASS team is working with some of the HASS pilot organizations. We'll be hosting some roundtables in the next few months with human services in local communities and just hearing from them, because we've gotten some astonishing information from human services organizations where they're saying 80% of the people that they interact with have no idea how to get any type of resource, even in a very well-resourced community with free spay neuter and vaccines and all of the above. So we're clearly missing the people that need us the most. And if we start just gathering the evidence, and I think this goes to the funding question that's in there too, some of these events to gather information and to help build the case, and using some of the evidence that's been created through the HASS library, and many other organizations have so much good information. Building the case and being able to say, we did this little pilot project and we were able to get a grant for that, but look at the impact it's been able to make. And that's why we really feel like the two initiatives in 2025 need to show the impact that the shelter needs and the government leaders who are funding the shelter need to be able to say, wow, we should do more of that. We need to kind of rethink what we're doing. And hopefully that answers some of the questions that are in there. But I think part of it is the proof of concept. And it's hard when we're looking at it in a giant community, no matter where it is, if it's a pilot community or not, and trying to say, 10,000 fewer animals came into the shelter. It's not going to happen like that. So how do we get a little bit more granular and say, this group of people we were able to help in a different way, and there was a decrease in that group of people needing to surrender their pet because there were other resources available in the community for them to rehome, to keep them through a move, to temporary board while they were going through rehab. We've also found out in many cases that needing a place for their pet is the #1 reason why people that are living on the streets do not go to rehab, and struggling with drug addiction. And that's huge because we can help. We house animals every day and we have foster homes. And so how do we start connecting and really showing how important animal services is to the whole city?
And I think we should remember that to focus on the wins. Every day we go to work and we have wins. I have full kennels every day, and every day I don't euthanize. That's a win. So focus on that, and make sure your community knows that. Make sure your community knows, how many you euthanize, how many you've sent home today, how many officers returned animals in the field, how many officers might have done a fence repair today. Make sure they understand what you're doing and the importance you're making to the community. And make sure your staff knows that. It's hard when we're in this mundane day-to-day operation and everybody leaves because, at the end of the day, and they're drained. But we had lots of wins today. And as a country, we're having lots of wins every day. So we need to focus on that.
Yes. Well, I know we're out of time, and I see that last comment from Lori in the chat, and I 100% agree. Nonprofits need to help, and it is hard because we all have our own fires to fight, but we need to figure out how to work together to make our communities better. So there'll be a brief poll. Like I said, we'll send you all the stuff so you've got your hands on it. And thank you for being part of our webinar tonight. And we can't wait to keep talking more.